Whenever you go to secure a network or a system, you're implementing some kind of security control. In this video, we're going to explain what exactly security controls are and how you classify them. So in general, a security control is what you use to provide some kind of security for your network. And typically these fall into at least one of four categories and one of six types. So what exactly is the difference between a category and a type? Well, a category basically defines how a certain security control is implemented. The type defines what the control actually does. So if categories is how it's implemented, and the type, which is what it's actually doing to secure your network. Like I said, you typically have four different categories and six different types. And each security control that you implement is going to fall into at least one of each. In the category side of things, you have technical controls, physical controls, operational controls, and managerial controls. So first of all, we have technical controls, and these are what we typically think of whenever we go to secure a network. Technical controls are controls that are implemented using technology. So this could be something on your network, like a network-based firewall or an intrusion detection system, or it can be directly on your system, something like antivirus or an access control list, security information and event management. Basically anything that you're using hardware or software-wise to provide some kind of security for your network, this is typically classified as a technical control. Second of all, we have physical controls. Physical controls are designed to prevent physical attacks and access. Now, usually whenever we have cyber attacks, you usually think of them as being some kind of remote connection to a system or anything like that, implementing some kind of malware or something along those lines. But not all cyber attacks are directly gaining access to systems. Sometimes it's about gaining physical access to a system or a site or a network or anything like that, and then performing some kind of physical attack. Maybe you're trying to actually destroy a system or a building or anything like that. Maybe you're trying to steal systems or servers. These all constitute physical attacks, and physical controls are designed to combat these particular types of attacks. For example, you could have walls to keep people from getting access to your site. You could have bollards that could keep people from ramming into your buildings with a vehicle. Key card readers that keep people from accessing certain areas of a building that they're not allowed to access. Kensington locks that prevent people from actually stealing your computers. All of these prevent physical attacks, so they are classified as physical controls. Thirdly, we have operational controls, and operational controls deal directly with the human element of your company. So for example, things like security training for employees or separation of duties, anything like this that directly affects your human workforce counts as an operational control. And fourth, we have managerial controls. So managerial controls are more about your long-term strategies and your management within your company. So think of things like vulnerability assessments, your risk management processes, your compliance audits, your gap analyses. Anything like this constitutes a managerial control because you're dealing with your long-term projects and management that affect your security as a whole. Sometimes you're going to hear policies and procedures being either an operational control or a managerial control. Some people and organizations have different definitions for this. For example, you're going to hear some security professionals and organizations talk about security policies and procedures being operational. And the justification for this is that policies and procedures directly impact human behavior in your company. Therefore, it affects the human element and can be considered operational. On the other side of things, you might hear policies and procedures being part of your long-term strategy because it's actually dealing with the management side of things. And in that case, they may classify them as managerial controls. And it's important to be aware of both definitions in case, you're working with an organization or a certain person who defines it one way or another. So I just wanted to explain that so you understand where exactly each side is coming from. So those are the four different categories of security controls. You have technical controls, which are implemented using technology, physical controls, which prevent physical attacks, operational controls that are for your human element, and managerial controls that are for the long-term management. But aside from the categories of security controls, you also have six different types. Remember, the categories are how the controls are implemented, and the types are what the controls are actually doing to provide security for your network. So let's talk about these six different types of security controls. First off, you have preventive controls. Preventive controls prevent an attack from occurring in the first place. If an attacker is actively trying to gain access to your network, a preventive control is basically like the wall in between your attacker and your network. You have your attacker over here trying to get into your network, and you have your preventive control right here in the middle, keeping them from doing so. So this can include things like firewalls that basically prevent those certain network connections. You have bollards that prevent attackers from ramming a vehicle into a building. You have patch management that prevents an attacker from exploiting certain vulnerabilities. All of these are designed to prevent active attacks and therefore classify as preventive controls. Second of all, you have detective controls. Detective controls aren't necessarily trying to stop an attack, rather they're designed to detect signs of an attack as it's occurring. So for example, your intrusion detection systems would generate logs of activity and basically detect whenever an attacker is trying to gain access. You might have security cameras and security guards that can actually see attackers trying to gain physical access into a building, or maybe they leave around like a USB drive or some kind of malicious system that can be plugged into a computer. All of these constitute detective controls because they detect the signs of an attack. So preventive controls take place before an attack to prevent it from happening. Detective controls detect an attack during the attack itself. And so corrective controls, our third type, take place after the attack to correct the effects. So for example, if a company is hit by ransomware and all the systems are affected, you can't access any data, you can have backups that are designed to bring back all of that data in its original form. That's an example of a corrective control because you're correcting the effects of the ransomware. Right now, you're not able to access your data, implement your backup, all of a sudden now you can access it again because you had that backup. If a fire is taking place on your site and you need to put it out, a fire extinguisher would count as a corrective control because you're trying to correct the effects of the fire. A non-compliance clause in your policies could also be considered corrective because if an employee performs some kind of activity that does not comply with your policies, non-compliance clauses would allow you to take action on that to correct the effects. So again, corrective controls take place after an attack occurs to correct the impact of that attack. So in addition to these three, we also have three others which fall into deterrent, compensating, and directive. So deterrent controls are designed to actively discourage attackers from wanting to execute an attack. Basically, the point here is trying to make attackers second guess themselves. This is different from preventive controls, which basically prevent active attackers who have made up their mind they're going to attack a network and then keep them from gaining actual access. So preventive controls prevent those attacks from happening. Deterrent controls basically get attackers to think maybe I don't want to attack the network in the first place. And so, for example, you could have warning messages on your systems basically saying if you gain unauthorized access to the system, you're subject to company policy and national laws or anything like that. That can make an attacker think, well, I don't want to experience anything like that. I don't want to have the consequences of that. Maybe I don't really want to attack this network at all. So they give up. Or you have a keep out sign that may keep attackers from saying like, maybe I don't want to access this because I might get some kind of punishment for doing so because I'm supposed to keep out. Maybe you have lights outside your site so that if an attacker tries to gain access during the night, the lights provide that visibility that makes them think, hey, I don't want to be seen. Maybe I don't want to go in the site at all because I don't want anybody to see me. Those are all deterrent controls because they discourage attackers from wanting to execute the attack. Compensating controls provide backup for an existing control to combat some weakness. So an important part of a lot of organizational networks might be having some kind of uninterruptible power supply, which a lot of us refer to as just backup batteries. But the problem is whenever you have a backup battery like this, they can run out of charge. They're great if you just want to be able to continue powering systems in the event of an outage. But the problem is once they run out of battery, then now they're useless. So how do you compensate for this? Well, you compensate for this by putting a generator on your site so that even though the uninterruptible power supply is able to continue powering systems, the generator can then kick in to provide continuous power without having to rely on how much charge the battery backups have left. So this is a compensating control because you're compensating for a weakness in those backup batteries. So our sixth type of security control is directive. Nowadays, cybersecurity isn't just for your security teams. Everybody is responsible for the security and the safety of your networks and your systems. Everybody has to play their part. So directive controls are designed to target your entire workforce to tell people how to behave in a certain way that makes everything more secure. For example, if you have an acceptable use policy, this could be considered a directive control because you're telling people, hey, here's what you need to do to treat our systems in a way that makes everything more secure and keeps everyone protected. Another example could be having things like signs and flyers that basically say, hey, remember, don't plug in a random USB device that you have lying around on your network. Don't plug in random cables or keyboards because these could log your activity that attackers could use to send back to them. So be careful. Do not do these certain things. Instead, do these things. You're directing people. You're telling them how to behave in a more secure way. And that right there is an example of a directive control. So to recap, we have four different categories of security controls, which are technical controls that are implemented using technology, physical controls that prevent physical attacks, operational controls that impact your human aspect, and managerial controls that impact your long-term strategies. You also have 6 different types of security controls, which are preventive, which prevent an attack from occurring, detective controls that detect an attack as it's occurring, corrective controls that correct the impact of an attack after it occurs, deterrent controls that discourage attackers from wanting to execute an attack, compensating controls that provide backup for an existing control, and directive controls that direct your workforce to behave in a more secure way. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you joining me today. I'll see you all next time. Adios.